I was still holding the carving knife when it happened. The weight of it familiar, my father's old blade warm from the turkey. The room loud with plates and chairs, Christmas lights blinking in the window like nothing bad could reach us. Kyle's hand snapped onto the back of the chair, and I remember thinking he was steadying it, helping, until he leaned in close and told me that seat belonged to his dad. His voice clear and practiced, like he had rehearsed it. I laughed once because my mind lagged behind his intent. Then his shove came hard, both hands, no hesitation. The chair scraped back, my boot caught the rug, and the floor rushed up fast, my hips screaming as I landed. Gravy splashing up my shirt, hot and thick. A sound like a fork hitting a plate cut the air, and I lay there stunned, staring at Kyle's face. Half smile said, breathing hard, waiting for someone to say my name. No one did. Linda did not rush to me, did not kneel, did not even look down. She grabbed napkins and went for the spill. Blotting the floor like that was the emergency. Her jaw tight, eyes fixed on the wood, and in that moment something inside me cooled. Not anger, something quieter and heavier. I pushed up on one hand, feeling the cold through my palm. My hip pulsing with each breath, and I searched the room. Forks frozen midair, kids wide-eyed, Ray standing tall like he had won something. And I understood how this had already been decided. I was not family to them. I was furniture. Useful until someone else wanted the space. The chair creaked as Kyle nudged it back, claiming it with his body, and I stood slowly, swallowing pain and pride together. My shirt stained, my face hot, my name still unsaid. I did not argue, I did not shout, I did not explain. I picked up my coat and walked out into the cold. The Iowa air sharpened my lungs, snow crunching under my boots. The porch light casting a weak circle behind me, and I felt older than my years. Every step a reminder that at my age you do not bounce. You remember, I sat in my truck with my hands locked on the wheel. The house glowing warm behind me, shapes moving inside like nothing had broken. And that was when it settled. The chair had never been about power. It was about place, about being seen. And when they let me hit the floor without saying my name, they told me exactly where I stood. So I started the engine, backed out slow, and drove away without looking back, knowing something final had already begun. I drove until the heater burned my knuckles warm. Radio off because I could not stand a song pretending this night was kind. The road empty and dark, snow flashing white in the headlights. And I realized I had nowhere to go that felt right. Not Linda's house. Not back to the table where my place had been erased. So I pulled into a gas station and sat there with the engine running. The smell of coffee and grease leaking through the vents, my hip throbbing with each heartbeat. And for the first time, I let myself feel how tired I was, not just tonight, but of all the years I had stood quietly to keep things smooth. Telling myself patience was strength, that kindness would circle back if I waited long enough. I thought about Cedar Rapids, about how a town remembers you by your habits. How you show up, how you pay your bills early, how your word means something because you have guarded it. I thought about my father teaching me that a man's name is his credit, not just money but trust, and how that chair had carried more than wood and screws. It carried mornings by the window, hospice silence. The way he watched the parking lot, like someone might still come home. And I remembered hauling it into my garage, tightening the loose joint, sanding the arms smooth, staining it walnut, fixing it with my own hands because that felt like honoring him, not displaying him. And I saw now how easily that history had been pushed aside by someone who never earned it. By the time I drove home, my home, the small ranch I owned long before Linda, the quiet felt different, honest, no pretending. I limped inside and changed out of the stained shirt. The bruise already blooming purple across my hip, wide and angry. I sat in my recliner with an ice pack and stared at nothing. Phone buzzing on the table, Linda's name lighting up the screen. Then Kyle's again and again. And I did not answer, not because I wanted revenge, but because I finally understood something simple and hard. If I spoke now, I would soften. I would make it easier for them to pretend this was small. And it was not small, it was a line. And it had been crossed, so I let the phone go quiet. And in that quiet, I felt the first shift, subtle but real. The moment when endurance stopped being a virtue and self-respect started asking for room. I did not sleep much. Every time I shifted, the pain flared. And every time my eyes closed, the scrape of the chair replayed. Kyle's hands, Linda's eyes on the floor. So I got up before dawn and made coffee the way my father liked it. Strong and plain, the house dark and still. Snow drifting past the window like it had no opinion. And I told myself again that it was just a bad night, a holiday gone wrong. People get strange around family and money and old ghosts. I tried to believe that. I stood there, nursing the mug, breathing steam, when my phone chimed with a sound I had almost forgotten. A sharp alert, not a call, not a text, something colder. A notification from the credit monitoring app I kept mostly out of habit. The screen lit up, and the words sat there heavy. Change detected, and before I even opened it, my stomach dropped. I tapped it and watched numbers shift in a way they never should. My credit score sliding down hard. Not a small wobble, a real fall, new inquiry. New account activity. My heart started pounding slow and thick. Because in my world, that only happens when someone opens something in your name. Something real, something tied to you. I scrolled, reading the details twice. Then a third time, hoping my eyes were wrong. But they were not, and my mind went quiet as pieces lined up. The timing, the confidence, the way Kyle had stood there like he owned the room, like he owned me. And I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Iowa winter. Because the only people who had access to my information were family. The people I had trusted enough to leave my name unguarded around. The phone started buzzing again. Linda, then Kyle, then Linda twice more, calls stacking up like pressure. I watched it without touching it, my thumb hovering. Because some part of me already knew this was not about a misunderstanding. This was about something done deliberately and quietly. The way they did things when they thought I would absorb it. Smooth it over, pay it off. I let the calls die and checked the details again. My chest tight, my mouth dry, and I understood then that the shove had not been the real violation. It had been the warning. The moment they stopped pretending I mattered enough to ask. Whatever they had done, it had my name on it, and my name was the one thing I had protected my entire life. I sat back in the chair, the alert glowing on the screen, and felt something settle into place. Not rage, not fear, but a steady resolve. Because this was no longer about a chair, or a holiday, or pride. It was about my identity. And I was not going to let that be taken quietly, too. By 6:30, I was dressed and in my truck. The sky still dark, streets quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your thoughts loud. My hip aching with every press of the pedal. And I welcomed it because it kept me focused. The credit union parking lot was mostly empty. Lights buzzing overhead, snow pushed into gray piles. And I sat there a moment with the engine off. Breathing slow, reminding myself to speak plainly. Not emotionally, because paperwork does not care how hurt you are. Inside the building, the air smelled like coffee and toner. A woman met me at the desk, kind eyes, calm voice. She said her name was Marcy, and she led me into a small office, closed the door gently, and asked if I was alone and able to talk. She slid a folder across the desk, neat and official. And on the top page, I saw names laid out like facts. Kyle's, Linda's, and then mine, printed under guarantor. My stomach rolled, but I kept my voice even. I told her I had never consigned anything. She nodded like she had heard that before, turned the monitor, and pulled up the signature page. And there it was, my name in black ink, close enough to fool a machine. Wrong enough to make my skin go cold, the loops were off. The ending flourish was something I would never do. And underneath it all was a name I had not used in decades. Tommy. Marcy watched my face and asked softly if it was mine. I said no, and she believed me without drama. Just reached into a drawer and set a form on the desk. Statement of fraud. She explained what it meant. Slowly, carefully, that signing it would open an investigation. That it could have serious consequences for whoever submitted the paperwork. My phone buzzed on the desk. Kyle's name lighting the screen, then Linda's. And Marcy looked away to give me space. She said I did not have to decide that second. I stared at the pen, at the signature on the screen, and thought about how many times I had signed my name with care. How my father had told me it was my bond with the world. I felt sick and steady at the same time, and I said I was not deciding out of anger. I was deciding because my name meant something. My hand did not shake when I signed the fraud statement. And when Marcy took the paper and tucked it into the folder, she said once it was opened, it could not be closed. I told her to let it stay open, and as I walked back out into the cold morning, I knew I had crossed a line I would not be able to step back over. But for the first time since Christmas Eve, I was standing on my own feet, even if they hurt. And that mattered more than keeping anyone comfortable. I did not call anyone when I left the credit union. I drove slow, letting the engine idle at long lights. My phone lighting up again and again on the seat beside me. Linda first, then Kyle, then a number I did not recognize. And I let them all ring out, because something had shifted the moment the paper slid into the folder. The choice was no longer emotional, it was procedural. And procedures do not bend for tears. I stopped at home long enough to grab the thin folder I keep on the hall shelf. Deeds, warranties, receipts, boring proof of a careful life. And I laid it out on the table, kitchen quiet except for the tick of the clock. I added a notebook and started writing dates and times, Christmas Eve, the shove, the calls, the alert, the loan amount, each line steady. Because memory fades, but ink does not, and I could feel myself stepping into a role I had avoided for years. Not fixer, not buffer, but witness, the calls kept coming. Kyle's name stacking like pressure, Linda's right behind it. And when I finally listened to the voicemails, the tone told the story. The first was irritation, telling me to call back and straighten it out. The second was confusion, saying it must be a mistake. The third was panic, voice tight, saying accounts were frozen and gas could not be bought. And somewhere in there he slipped and called me Dad before correcting himself. Like the word only mattered when he needed something. I did not feel satisfaction hearing it, just a dull confirmation of what I already knew. They expected me to absorb this, quietly, like I always had. I wrote that down too, expectation of coverage. Because that was the pattern, and patterns matter when truth is questioned. By midday, the pressure turned outward. Texts from relatives, messages from church friends, people telling me I was ruining Christmas. That Kyle was just a kid, that Linda was under stress. And I saved every one without replying, because I was done defending myself in conversations that never protected me. Then the call came from an investigator. Calm voice, official, asking to meet, and I agreed without hesitation. Because sunlight is the enemy of messes that rely on silence. When I hung up, I sat back and felt the weight of it settle. This was no longer about smoothing things over. It was about allowing consequences to land where they belonged. I thought about the shove again. How easy it had been for Kyle to put his hands on me when he believed there would be no cost. And I understood something clear and uncomfortable. People do what they think they can get away with. And for years, I had taught them they could get away with using me. Filing that fraud statement was not an act of revenge. It was me quitting a job I had never applied for. The job of protecting other people from the results of their own choices. And once I saw it that way, the fear eased, replaced by a calm I had not felt in a long time. I went back to Linda's house that afternoon. Not to argue, not to fix anything, just to say what needed saying. The driveway still marked with tire tracks from Christmas Eve. The porch light off in the daylight, like it was ashamed. And when I walked in, Kyle was already there, pacing, eyes red, jaw tight, acting like I had done something to him. He came at me fast with words, asking if I was happy now, saying everything was frozen, that Ray was losing his mind. And behind him, Ray stood loud and solid, coat still on, filling the room with bluster, talking about family loyalty and how you do not do this to your own. And all the while my father's chair sat pushed into the corner like it had been punished. My history exiled to make room for their comfort. Kyle stepped closer, voice sharp, telling me I could have just paid it. That I always paid things, that this was just paperwork. And when I asked why my name was on an $18,000 loan, the room went still. Linda stood in the kitchen doorway, twisting a dish towel until her knuckles went white. And after a long pause, she whispered that she had signed it, that she thought it would be okay, that Kyle needed help, and that I would have said no. She said it like that explained everything, and I felt something inside me crack cleanly. Not into anger, but into clarity. I told her no is a full sentence. And my name is not a community resource. Kyle's face shifted from arrogance to fear. And he accused me of making his mother a criminal, of choosing paperwork over people. And I told him the truth. I did not make anything happen. I told the truth about what had already been done. The pressure came fast after that. Voices raised, Ray pointing, Kyle pleading, Linda crying. All of them telling me to fix it. To call someone, to say I had signed it, to smooth it over like always. And that was when Kyle said the thing that hurt more than the shove. He said, "You always cover it, like it was a rule, like it was my purpose." And I realized how deeply they had counted on my silence. I turned and walked out before my temper made a mess I could not clean. My hips screaming with each step, my chest tight but steady, because I finally understood that standing my ground would look like cruelty to people who benefited from me having none. And as I drove away, phone buzzing with desperate messages, I did not feel powerful. I felt finished. Finished being the quiet solution to problems I did not create. Finished being treated like a guest in a life I had helped build. And whatever came next, I knew it would be honest, even if it hurt. The meeting with the investigator happened the next morning in a small windowless room. Beige walls, a recorder on the table, the kind of place where stories either hold or collapse. He asked me to start at Christmas Eve, so I did, the chair. The shove, the silence, and I kept it plain. Dates, words, actions, because facts breathe better than feelings in rooms like that. He listened without interrupting, eyes steady. Then slid 3 blank pages toward me and asked me to sign my name 10 times. Normal, no rush. My pen moved the way it always had. Practiced, consistent, Tom Walker again and again. And when he laid those pages beside the loan document, the difference was obvious even to me. The rhythm wrong, the ending sloppy, the childish curl on the first name that I had not used since my father was alive. He asked who had access to my personal information. And I told him the truth. My wife did. We were married. Trust was part of the deal until it was not. He nodded and wrote that down. Then asked if I had any reason to believe the borrower expected me to cover the debt. And that question landed heavier because it pulled years of quiet patterns into focus. I told him about the calls, the voicemails, the panic not about wrongdoing but about inconvenience. How quickly they asked me to fix it, to say I signed it, to make it go away. He did not react, just asked for copies. So I handed over what I had saved, messages, timestamps, call logs. And I felt a strange relief watching the mess move out of my head and onto paper, where it belonged. When it was over, he closed the folder and said the words I had been bracing for. The findings would be forwarded. There could be charges. He told me to be prepared. And I realized I already was, because the worst part had already happened in a dining room. Not a courtroom. Outside the building, the air was cold and clean. And my phone lit up again. Kyle this time, then Ray, then Linda. And for the first time, I did not feel pulled to answer. I felt anchored. Because the truth was no longer something I carried alone. It had witnesses now, procedures, a record. And whatever story they told themselves about me being cruel or dramatic, it would not erase the simple fact that they had taken my name without asking and expected me to pay for it quietly as I drove away, hip aching, jaw set. I understood that the investigation was not the escalation. It was the consequence catching up, and once that starts, it does not care who gets uncomfortable along the way. The courtroom was colder than I expected, wood benches worn smooth. The judge high above us like a reminder that stories end somewhere solid. Linda sat a few rows ahead, shoulders curled inward. Kyle pacing beside her in a suit that could not hide his restlessness. Ray standing stiff, with his arms crossed like volume alone might save him. When Kyle saw me, he leaned forward and hissed that I did not have to do this. And I told him quietly that I was not doing anything. I was answering for my name. The bailiff called our case, and the room settled. The judge asked the question plain, whether I had agreed to Kazan alone. And I said no, steady, no explanation attached. Just the truth where it belonged. The credit union representative testified first, dates, amounts, the missed payments. The signature labeled Tommy Walker. The investigator followed, laying out the comparison between my real signature and the one on the loan, pointing to the differences without drama. Kyle's lawyer tried to frame it as a family misunderstanding, stress, miscommunication. But the judge stopped him with a raised hand and asked for proof of consent. There was none when the judge asked Kyle directly if I had agreed. He hesitated too long, looked at Ray, then admitted not directly. And the room seemed to tighten around him, because hesitation is loud in places built for truth. Then I handed over the audio, recorded outside the house the night of Christmas Eve. The wind noise first, then Kyle's voice laughing, calling me maintenance, saying I would pay it like I always did. Ray agreeing, confident and careless, and the courtroom went still in the way real silence happens. Not polite, but heavy. The judge did not look up when she spoke. She said the statement showed intent, that expecting someone to absorb a debt without consent was not a misunderstanding. It was misuse. She ordered the matter referred forward, outlined consequences without raising her voice, and as we were dismissed, I felt no victory, no rush, just a strange calm, because the shove had tried to put me in my place, and instead it had put the truth on the record. And once something is said out loud in a room like that, it does not go back to being a secret, no matter how badly someone wants it to. The weeks after the hearing felt quieter than the noise that led up to it. Cedar Rapids went back to its routines, snow piled dirty along the curbs, people rushing into stores with their heads down. And I learned how fast the world moves on once the story is no longer new. Linda stayed with her sister for a while, then came back to the house to pack things slowly, carefully, like she was afraid of breaking what little was left. Kyle stopped calling, then started texting again, blaming me for the truck he had to sell, for the job that went to someone else, for the mess that followed him, and I read it all without replying, because I finally understood that taking responsibility would feel like punishment to someone who had never practiced it. One afternoon, I went back with a friend to retrieve my father's chair. Not to argue, not to gloat, just to take what was mine. It sat in the corner where they had pushed it, wood dulled by neglect, like it had been waiting. I ran my hand along the armrest and felt the smooth place where my father's palm used to rest. Linda stood nearby wringing her hands, saying of course I could take it, and when we carried it out, the chair creaked once, familiar, steady, and in that sound I felt something return to me that had nothing to do with winning. On the drive home, I realized the chair had never been the power. It was the proof of who I was connected to, and Kyle had not taken it by sitting there. He had only shown how little he understood what it meant. That night, I placed the chair by my living room window and sat with a cup of coffee, watching snowdrift under the streetlight. The house quiet in a way that did not demand anything from me. My phone buzzed once. A short message from Kyle saying he did not think I would actually do it, and I answered truthfully that neither did I until he forced my hand. There was no apology after that, just silence. And I found that I could live with it, because the quiet no longer felt like exile, it felt like space. Space to sit in my own name without anyone trying to take it from me. And for the first time since Christmas Eve, I slept without replaying the sound of that chair scraping away from me, because it was back where it belonged, and so was I. The separation papers were signed on a gray morning. No shouting, no slammed doors, just ink and quiet breaths. Linda cried softly, not theatrically, like someone mourning a future she thought would hold itself together. I felt sad but not hollow, because the worst grief had already passed unnoticed on a kitchen floor. Frank stood nearby, steady as ever, and when it was done, he clapped my shoulder once and asked if I was all right. I looked at the flag snapping in the cold wind outside the courthouse and told him I would be, because for the first time in years, I was not shrinking to keep anyone else standing, and that felt like balance returning. Life settled into something smaller and truer, mornings with strong coffee, evenings with quiet that did not accuse me of anything. No one calling to fix a problem that was not mine. The house creaked and hummed like it always had, familiar and honest. I put the chair by the window and sat there most nights, watching snow melt into wet pavement, then freeze again. I was doing what it does without apology. My phone stayed mostly silent, and when it did buzz, I chose whether to answer instead of feeling obligated. That choice alone felt like freedom, not loud, not dramatic, just steady. Sometimes I think back to that Christmas table, the shove, the silence, the way my name disappeared when I needed it most. And I understand now that the moment was not about losing a seat. It was about being told I did not matter, and choosing not to accept that I did not take revenge. I took responsibility for myself. I let consequences land where patience had been mistaken for permission. And in the end, what I took back was simple and permanent. My name, my place, my right to sit without being pushed aside. I sit in my father's chair now, coffee warm in my hands, house quiet around me, and there is no one left to tell me where I belong, because I finally know it myself. By spring, the snow was gone, replaced by wet sidewalks and the honest smell of dirt warming up. And my life had narrowed into something manageable. Work, home, coffee in the morning, the chair by the window at night. No emergencies that were not mine. No voices telling me to smooth things over. Linda called once after the papers were final, her voice careful, asking how I was. And I told her the truth, that I was steady. Not happy, not bitter, just steady. She said she was learning things about herself she should have faced years ago. And I believed her. Growth often comes late and expensive. I wished her peace and meant it. Then I hung up and felt no urge to explain myself further, because closure does not always come with agreement. Sometimes it comes when you stop needing permission to move on. Kyle never apologized. Not really. He sent one message months later saying he hoped I understood he was under pressure. And I read it without anger. Pressure does not put your hands on someone. Pressure does not forge a name. Choices do that. I did not reply. not out of spite, but because silence was the most honest answer I had left. Ray disappeared from my life entirely. Loud men tend to vanish when consequences show up quietly, and that absence felt like relief more than loss. I learned that family is not defined by who sits at your table, but by who stands up when you are on the floor. That lesson stayed with me, sharp and useful, something I will carry without resentment. Now, most nights I sit in my father's chair with a mug cooling in my hands, watching headlights pass, listening to the house settle, and I think about how close I came to apologizing for being shoved, how trained I was to shrink for peace. And I feel grateful I did not. The chair creaks when I lean back. The same old sound, steady, familiar, like a reminder that some things endure if you protect them. I did not win anything. I did not ruin anyone. I simply stopped sacrificing myself to keep other people comfortable. And that choice changed everything. If you have ever been told to know your place, if you have ever been treated like maintenance instead of family, remember this: patience is not permission, silence is not consent, and your name is not something anyone gets to borrow without paying the full price. I took back my name, and with it, I took back my life.